The stars above Earth were calm that night, but for the alien princess, they carried the weight of endless distance. She had traveled far beyond her homeworld, leaving behind the familiar skies and voices of her people. The decision had not been hers to make. She was chosen as a symbol, an offering of peace in a fragile treaty between two civilizations. To many, she was simply a political figure. To her, however, it felt like a journey into the unknown, a step into a world that did not belong to her, yet pulled at her with strange curiosity. Her arrival had been quiet. There were no parades, no grand celebrations. Instead, she was escorted into hidden halls and guarded stations, where Earth's leaders kept their new guests safe and closely watched. At first, the humans treated her with caution. They spoke to her politely, always careful with their words, as if afraid of breaking the fragile balance between their worlds. She understood why. History had not been kind when alien powers met humanity before. Trust was not easily given, yet the princess noticed something beyond their caution. There was warmth in the way some humans looked at her. A guard who opened the door with a small nod. A scientist who offered her a smile after showing her how Earth's technology worked. Even the children she once glimpsed from the window of her quarters, they laughed freely, pointing at the sky without fear. It was a kind of warmth her own people rarely showed. The princess had been raised among strict traditions. Her people valued order, structure, and control. Families were not born the way humans created them. Children came from sterile chambers, chosen by councils and shaped by genetic planning. Love, as humans described it, was not part of the process. Everything had its place and there was no room for chance. For most of her life, she believed this was natural, that life must be engineered, not lived. But humans were different. She could see it in their stories, in the way they spoke about the past and dreamed of the future. They laughed even when times were hard. They argued fiercely, yet came together when danger rose. And most of all, they multiplied in a way that seemed reckless yet beautiful, trusting themselves to raise their young with care, despite the risks of failure. It fascinated her. One evening, while listening to a human teacher explain the basics of Earth's history, the princess interrupted with a question that silenced the room. She had heard the word multiply used not only in mathematics but also when describing how humans grew their numbers. She tilted her head and asked with innocent curiosity, "How do humans multiply?" The teacher, startled, hesitated. The guards exchanged glances. Even the interpreter stammered, unsure how to explain such a concept without misunderstanding. For the princess, the question was not meant to embarrass or confuse. It was genuine. Her people had no such practice. To her, it was not about biology alone, it was about choice, trust, and the mystery of bringing life into the world without control from councils or machines. When the answer finally came, it was simple, spoken softly so she could understand. Humans multiply by forming bonds, by sharing lives, and by raising children born from both love and struggle. It was not a process controlled by governments or leaders, but by ordinary people who carried hope into the future. The princess listened intently, her eyes wide with curiosity. She had never imagined such a way of living could exist. That night, she sat by the window of her quarters, staring at the glowing cities of Earth below. She thought of the sterile halls of her own world, where children were designed to meet the needs of society. She thought of the laughter of human children she had seen earlier that day. The difference was clear. Her people created citizens, humans created families, and for reasons she could not yet explain, that difference stirred something inside her heart. The days that followed only deepened her thoughts. She began asking more questions, each one surprising her human hosts. She wanted to know why humans risked so much for their children, why they accepted the struggles that came with raising them, and why they spoke of love as if it were stronger than fear. Some humans laughed kindly at her questions, others answered with stories of their own families, and a few grew quiet, their eyes filled with memories too heavy to share. The princess listened to every word. Each answer added weight to the mystery of humanity. She could not yet put it into the language of her people, but she sensed something powerful in the human way of life, something her world had lost long ago. For the first time since leaving her home, the princess did not feel like just a symbol of peace. She felt like a student of humanity, eager to learn, to understand, and perhaps even to experience what it truly meant to live as they did. And as she watched the humans move through their lives, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, she began to wonder if her journey was not a duty forced upon her, but a path she had been meant to walk all along. The princess's curiosity only grew stronger with each passing day. What she had first thought of as a simple question was now a doorway into something far larger than she imagined. She could not let go of the thought that humans multiplied in a way that was not only about numbers, but about bonds. The explanation she had received still echoed in her mind. Families formed through choice, not design. Love, trust, hope, all things her own people considered unnecessary, were the foundation of this human way. Every morning, when she walked through the learning halls built for her stay, she watched the humans more closely. She noticed details she had ignored before. A young researcher carried a picture of his children in his pocket and would glance at it when work grew difficult, as if it gave him strength. A nurse in the facility hummed softly while caring for an injured colleague, her care gentle and patient even when she was tired. Even the guards, who always seemed stern and focused, would sometimes share quiet stories about their families back home. Each example showed her something new. Humans carried their families inside their hearts no matter where they went. The princess began asking more questions, often surprising the people around her. She asked the nurse, "Why do you stay awake so long just to take care of others? Does it not hurt you?" The nurse smiled, though her eyes were weary, and replied, "Because one day someone will do the same for me." That is what family means. The princess stayed silent, replaying the words again and again, as if they held a secret answer she had been searching for her entire life. One afternoon, her teachers decided to show her human history in more detail. She was guided into a wide room where moving images played across a large screen. The story told of wars, famine, disease, and disasters that had once shaken the earth. But through every tragedy humans endured, they did not vanish into silence. They rebuilt their homes, they raised their children in ruins, and they never stopped multiplying. The princess leaned forward, her eyes wide. She had been raised to believe that survival required perfect planning, careful breeding, and control over every life born in her world. Yet here were humans, messy and unpredictable, surviving not because of order but because of the very bonds that her people had abandoned. The thought unsettled her. If humans could endure so much, perhaps there was a strength hidden in their way that her kind had overlooked. Later that night, she sat with one of her interpreters, a young man who patiently translated her questions and answers. She asked him, "Do you not fear bringing children into a world so uncertain? What if they suffer? What if they fail?" The interpreter thought carefully before answering. His voice was calm but firm. "Yes, we fear. But hope is always stronger than fear. When we bring life into this world, we do it not because we are certain, but because we believe tomorrow can be better than today." The word struck her deeply. Hope. That was not a word often spoken in her own tongue. On her homeworld, the future was not left to belief. It was shaped by rules and plans. But here humans embraced uncertainty with courage. They believed in the unseen, in the idea that something good could rise even from pain. As the days passed, the princess began writing her thoughts in a private journal. She filled the pages with questions, sketches of things she had seen, and fragments of human words that carried meanings her own language struggled to hold. She wrote of laughter, of warmth, of bonds that stretched beyond duty. Each word felt like a small step toward understanding. Her advisors, however, were less pleased. They noticed her growing fascination with human customs and warned her to be cautious. "Their ways are unstable," one told her sharply. "They live in chaos without order. Do not let their habits cloud your judgment. You are here to observe, not to admire." But the princess could not stop herself. The more they warned her, the more she wanted to know. She felt that there was truth in the human way of life that her people had buried long ago. It was not just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, a pull inside her heart she could not explain. One evening, she was allowed to walk outside under the open sky, escorted by guards. She watched families gathering in the city below, parents holding their children's hands, grandparents telling stories, siblings chasing one another in play. The sight stirred something warm and strange within her. She whispered softly to herself, "So this is how they multiply. Not just by numbers, but by love that continues through generations." Her guards glanced at her curiously, but she said no more. She only stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the glowing lights of Earth's cities. In that moment, the princess felt both small and vast at once. Small because she realized how much she did not yet understand. Vast because she felt that she was standing at the edge of a discovery that could change everything. Not just for her, but perhaps for her entire people. That night, as she returned to her quarters, she touched her chest as if trying to steady the strange rhythm of her heart. Something had awakened inside her. A desire not only to learn but to try, to experience what it truly meant to live the human way. And though she did not yet know how, she promised herself silently that she would not turn away from this path. The princess woke early, long before the sun touched the horizon. She sat by the window watching the quiet world outside. The human city still slept, its lights glowing faintly like stars fallen to the earth. It was peaceful, but her thoughts were restless. Each day she learned more, and each day her heart filled with questions her tutors could not answer. She wanted to see beyond the walls of her safe quarters. She wanted to walk among the people whose lives fascinated her so deeply. Her request to do so was met with hesitation. Her advisors reminded her of her duty. "You are not here to explore. You are here as a symbol of peace," they repeated. But the princess pressed on, her voice calm yet firm. "How can I understand their way if I only see them from afar?" The humans who guarded her looked at one another, uncertain, but finally agreed to grant her a small visit under strict watch. The following afternoon, she was taken into the heart of the city. For the first time, the princess walked on human streets. She heard the hum of vehicles, the chatter of voices, the laughter of children. Every sound was alive, every corner filled with movement. It was nothing like the controlled halls of her own world, where order silenced chaos and streets were designed to be uniform and still. Here, everything breathed with unpredictability. Her eyes lingered on the people most of all. A mother carried a baby close to her chest, whispering softly to calm its cries. A pair of siblings argued over a toy, then moments later laughed as they shared it again. An old man sat on a bench feeding birds with crumbs from his hand, smiling gently as children ran past him. None of this was planned, yet it all seemed to flow together naturally. The princess paused, struck by a strange feeling she had no word for. It was not simply curiosity anymore. It was something warmer, something that made her chest tighten as she watched the bonds between people. She turned to her guard and asked softly, "Do they always live like this, with so many connections pulling them together?" The guard, unsure how to answer, simply nodded. Later that day, she was brought into a small learning hall where children gathered. The teacher, surprised but honored by her presence, welcomed her warmly. The princess watched as the children recited lessons, drew pictures, and laughed with one another. When one child dropped a pencil, another picked it up without hesitation. When one grew nervous while speaking aloud, others clapped to encourage him. Even at their young age, they carried the same bonds she had seen in adults: support, patience, kindness. Unable to resist, the princess asked the children a question. "Why do you help each other so quickly? Why do you care when you gain nothing in return?" The classroom grew quiet for a moment. Then a small girl raised her hand and answered shyly, "Because one day I might need help too. If I am kind now, maybe someone will be kind to me later." The princess stared at the child, her heart racing. Such simple words carried more wisdom than all the rules her people had ever written. As evening came, she returned to her quarters with thoughts swirling in her mind. She could not stop remembering the faces she had seen, the mother holding her child, the siblings laughing, the old man feeding birds, the children helping each other. It was as if humanity itself was teaching her in ways no advisor ever could. She wrote quickly in her journal, filling pages with observations. "They multiply not only with children," she wrote, "but with kindness, with courage, with the sharing of burdens. They multiply hope." Her advisors grew uneasy with her growing fascination. They tried to remind her of her purpose, warning that she was becoming too close to these humans. But she answered calmly, "How can peace exist without understanding? If we only look from a distance, we see numbers, but if we walk among them, we see hearts." Her words silenced them for the moment, though she knew they would not remain silent forever. That night, the princess dreamed for the first time since her arrival. In her dream, she stood on a bridge between two worlds. On one side was the sterile, quiet halls of her home, and on the other, the noisy, living streets of Earth. She walked forward, feeling both fear and hope, unsure of where her steps would lead. When she awoke, her heart was still racing, but she felt stronger than before. The next day, she returned to her lessons with new determination. She no longer listened only with her ears, but with her heart. Every story of human struggle became more than history. It became a lesson in resilience. Every small act of kindness she witnessed became proof of strength. She began to see that humanity's way of multiplying was not reckless, as her advisors claimed, but deeply powerful. It was this power that had allowed them to survive storms, wars, and endless trials. For the princess, the discovery was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was becoming a calling. She wanted to learn not just by watching, but by living as they did. She wanted to feel the same strength that came from bonds freely chosen, not imposed by councils. And though she did not yet know how she would take that step, she felt certain that her path was leading her closer to it. The princess had learned much by watching, but now she wanted answers directly from the people themselves. Observation was no longer enough. She felt her understanding of humanity was still only on the surface, like standing at the edge of a vast ocean and seeing only the waves. To know more, she would have to step inside. Her request surprised her advisors. When she asked to speak with ordinary humans, farmers, workers, families, they looked at her in alarm. "You are not here to wander among strangers," one of them warned. "You are here to represent your world." But the princess refused to back down. Her voice, though calm, carried a firmness that startled them. "If I am to represent my world, then I must understand this one. I must listen to their voices, not only your explanations." After long debate, the humans hosting her finally allowed a carefully arranged meeting. In a quiet town not far from the city, a small group of families agreed to welcome her. It was not a grand gathering. No banners, no ceremonies, only ordinary people waiting in curiosity. For them, the alien princess was not a symbol, but a guest. As she entered the town square, the princess felt her steps slow. Children peeked from behind their parents, wide-eyed and whispering. Some of the elders stood with cautious respect, unsure what to expect. But what struck her most was the openness in their faces. They were not hiding their emotions as her people always did. They were not guarded or careful. They were simply themselves. A woman stepped forward first, holding a child by the hand. She bowed slightly, then smiled. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm. The princess returned the bow awkwardly, unsure if she had done it correctly, but the woman only laughed softly and guided her to sit among them. The questions began simply. The humans wanted to know about her home, her people, her life as a princess. She answered honestly, though carefully, speaking of sterile halls and the way her people created life through controlled chambers. At this, many of the humans frowned in confusion, some even in sadness. Then it was her turn to ask. Her first question was the one that had burned in her heart for so long. "Why do you risk so much to bring children into this world, when you cannot know what the future will hold?" For a moment, silence filled the square. Then an older man spoke, his voice rough but steady. "Because life itself is worth the risk. Every child is a chance to make the future better than the past." Others nodded, adding their thoughts. One woman said, "We don't know if tomorrow will be kind, but we know our children will carry us into it." A younger man added, "It is not about control. It is about trust. Trust that they will find their own way." The princess listened to every word, her chest tightening with emotions she could not name. These were not answers of logic or planning, but answers of the heart, and somehow, they carried more weight than all the precise calculations her people had ever made. As the evening grew late, the families shared food with her. She watched as they passed bowls and plates, laughing, teasing one another, sharing stories of ordinary days. There was no ceremony, no rigid rules. The meal was messy, imperfect, and yet it felt more alive than any feast she had ever attended in the royal halls of her homeworld. At one point, a child shyly approached her, offering a small flower he had picked from the ground. The princess froze, unsure what to do. No one had ever given her something so simple, so unplanned. Slowly, she accepted it, holding it carefully as if it were more precious than gold. The child grinned, then ran babe CK to his friends. The princess kept the flower close, her heart strangely full. On the journey back to the city, she sat in silence, the flower still in her hand. Her advisors spoke nervously about the risks of such visits, warning that she might misunderstand these humans or be swayed by their emotions. But she no longer heard their words clearly. Her thoughts were elsewhere, turning over the voices she had just heard. Every sentence, every story seemed to sink deeper into her. She realized something that night. Humans were not strong because of their technology, their weapons, or their numbers. They were strong because of their bonds. Each connection, parent to child, friend to friend, stranger to stranger, wove together into a strength her people could not measure. In her private journal, she wrote until her hand ached. They survive because they choose to care for one another. They multiply not only in bodies but in love. Perhaps this is the secret I was meant to discover. The princess did not know what her people would think if she spoke these thoughts aloud. They might call her foolish, naive, even dangerous, but she also felt a growing certainty inside her. Humanity's way was not weakness, as her advisors claimed. It was a strength her people had long forgotten. And as she placed the small flower carefully between the pages of her journal, she whispered to herself, "I must not only learn their way, I must live it." The princess's fascination with humanity could no longer be hidden. Every day she asked more questions, listened more closely, and filled her journal with thoughts that troubled her advisors. At first they thought it was harmless curiosity. But soon they realized she was not just studying humans, she was beginning to admire them. That alarmed them more than anything else. Her advisors gathered late at night, whispering in the corners of her quarters. They spoke of danger, of weakness, of the risk that she was forgetting her duty. "She is losing herself," one muttered. "If she continues down this path, she may betray the very purpose of this mission." Their voices were low, but the princess, awake in the next room, heard enough to understand. The next morning, when she appeared before them, they tried to hide their concern behind calm expressions. One of them reminded her, "You are here to observe, nothing more. Do not be deceived by the illusions of their way of life. It is unstable. They build on emotions that can collapse at any moment. You must remember who you are." But the princess answered softly, her voice steady. "If emotions are weakness, then how do they survive storms, wars, and endless struggles? If hope is foolish, then why has it carried them through so much darkness? I cannot ignore what I have seen." The advisors frowned but said nothing more. They could see the fire in her eyes, a fire that could not be easily put out. That day she was taken to a human research center as part of her studies. There she saw rows of machines, screens filled with data, and humans working side by side. What caught her attention, however, was not the machines but the way the people supported each other. When one researcher grew tired, another brought him food. When one made a mistake, the others corrected it without anger, moving forward together. The work was not perfect, yet it moved like a living rhythm, messy but united. The princess asked one of the scientists, "Why do you continue even when you fail? Would it not be easier to stop until you are certain of success?" The scientist smiled, his hands still busy at the console. "Because we learn through failure. Each mistake brings us closer to the answer. If we stopped every time we stumbled, we would never move at all." Her advisors whispered among themselves, worried at how quickly she absorbed such ideas. But the princess only nodded, her thoughts deepening. Failure as a path, not an end. Another truth her people had long dismissed. That evening, she walked in the gardens near her quarters, guarded but lost in thought. A human guard, noticing her silence, dared to speak. "You are troubled," he said gently. She turned to him, surprised by his honesty. "I see strength where I was told there is only weakness," she admitted. "And I fear my people will never accept what I am learning." The guard thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes the hardest truth is the one your own people refuse to see. But truth does not disappear because it is ignored. It waits until someone is brave enough to speak it." His words stayed with her long after he left. For the first time she wondered if she was meant to be that someone, but not all welcomed her growing insight. That night one advisor confronted her directly. "You are walking on dangerous ground," he warned. "If you continue, you may bring shame to your house and dishonor to your people. Humanity is not to be copied. Their way leads to disorder. You must not give it value." The princess met his gaze, her voice calm but unyielding. "What you call disorder, I call life. What you call weakness, I see as strength. If my people cannot see it, then perhaps it is time they learned." The advisor's face darkened, but he said no more. He could see that she had already chosen her path. Later, alone in her chamber, the princess opened her journal once again. She placed the dried flower the child had given her between the pages and began to write. They fear chaos, but I see beauty in it. They fear uncertainty, but I see courage in it. I have discovered something they cannot measure. Love as strength, hope as survival. If this is considered dangerous, then I must accept the danger. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote the final words of the night. I will not only learn from humanity, I will follow them. She closed the book and pressed it to her chest, her heart beating fast. She knew her decision would not be without consequence. Her advisors would resist, her people might condemn her, and the galaxy itself might whisper against her choice. But she also knew this. Humanity had shown her a way of living that no rules or machines could replace. And as she lay down to rest, her thoughts carried her forward into a future she could not yet see. A future where she would stand not as a silent observer, but as a bridge between two worlds. A future shaped not by fear of failure, but by the courage to try. The princess's decision began quietly, as a whisper in her own heart, but soon it grew too strong to hide. She could no longer stand at a distance, watching humanity as though it were a story separate from her own. She wanted to live their way, not just admire it. She wanted to step across the invisible line her advisors had drawn and claim the right to choose for herself. Her chance came when Earth's leaders invited her to speak at a cultural gathering. It was meant to be a simple event, a gesture of goodwill between their worlds. Her advisors urged her to keep her words polite and cautious, to speak only of peace and unity, avoiding anything that might sound like approval of human traditions. But the princess had already decided she would not remain silent. The hall was filled with humans, leaders, scholars, families, and even children. Their eyes followed her as she stepped onto the platform. She stood still for a long moment, feeling the weight of countless gazes. Then she began to speak, her voice calm yet steady, carrying a strength that surprised even herself. I came here as a symbol of peace, she said. I was told my duty was only to observe, not to feel, not to learn. But I cannot stand before you and pretend I have seen nothing. I have walked among you. I have listened to your voices. I have witnessed how you multiply, not only in children, but in love, in kindness, in hope. You create bonds that no machine can design, and through those bonds you endure. The hall grew quiet. Every word seemed to echo against the walls. Her advisors shifted uncomfortably, their expressions darkening, but the humans leaned forward, listening with open hearts. My people believe order is strength, she continued. We shape life through control, fearing what may come if chance is allowed to guide us. But here I have seen that what we call weakness is the very reason you survive. You embrace uncertainty. You face failure. You carry hope even in the darkest hours. And through this you multiply not only in number but in spirit. Gasps rippled through the hall. For a moment even the humans seemed stunned. Then soft applause began, growing louder until it filled the room. The princess's advisors rose from their seats, their faces pale with anger. But it was too late. Her words had already been spoken and they could not be taken back. That night the advisors confronted her in private. Their voices were sharp, their words filled with warning. You have gone too far, one of them said. You have chosen to praise them instead of protecting your own traditions. Do you realize what you have done? The council will hear of this. You may be stripped of your title. You may never return home. The princess listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. When they finished, she raised her head and answered with calm resolve. If speaking the truth costs me my title, then so be it. I have seen strength my people do not understand. If they call it betrayal, then I will accept the name. But I will not deny what I know is real. The advisors stared at her, stunned by her defiance. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then one shook his head and muttered, You are no longer the daughter of order. You are a daughter of chaos now. But the princess only closed her eyes, thinking of the children she had met, the families she had watched, the flower still pressed inside her journal. If this was chaos, then it was a kind of chaos she was willing to claim. In the days that followed, word of her speech spread quickly. Some humans saw her as a brave voice, a bridge between two worlds. Others worried that her choice might bring conflict with her people. Across the stars, whispers reached her homeworld, stirring both anger and curiosity. The council demanded explanations, but the princess remained firm. She had made her choice. She began spending more time among humans, not as a guest to be guarded, but as a student eager to learn. She visited schools, farms, and workshops. She listened to stories of ordinary lives, of hardships and triumphs, of love that endured across generations. Everywhere she went, she carried herself not as royalty, but as someone who wanted to understand. One evening, while walking through a crowded marketplace, she noticed something that struck her deeply. A storm had knocked out the power and the streets were dark. Yet instead of fear, the people lit candles, shared food, and sang songs to keep spirits alive. Strangers helped each other without hesitation. In the midst of darkness, humanity created its own light. The princess whispered to herself, "This is how they survive, not because the world is kind, but because they make it kind for each other." She knew then that her decision was not only about admiration, it was about belonging. She wanted to live by these same bonds, to carry hope as they did, even if it meant defying everything she had been taught. Her advisors tried one final time to change her mind. They warned her that by choosing this path, she risked dividing her people and shattering the fragile peace between worlds. But the princess only answered, "Peace without truth is no peace at all. If my people cannot see the value in humanity's way, then it is my duty to show them, even if it costs me everything." That night, she looked up at the stars once more, the same stars she had stared at when she first arrived, but now they felt different. They no longer seemed distant or cold. They seemed alive, filled with possibilities. She pressed her journal against her chest and whispered, "I will live as they live. I will multiply hope just as they do." And with that vow, the princess stepped fully onto the path she had chosen, a path that would forever change her, her people, and the destiny of two worlds. The days after the princess's vow moved quickly, as though the universe itself had begun to push her forward. Her words had spread far beyond the marketplace, beyond the city, and even beyond Earth. Across the stars, they echoed in places she had never seen. Some on her homeworld called her a traitor, others quietly called her brave. The council demanded her immediate return, yet the humans stood firm, refusing to send her away against her will. For the first time, she was no longer just a guest. She was someone who had chosen a side. But with her choice came danger. Messages arrived from her world, cold, official, and filled with warning. They said her voice was too loud, her influence too strong, and if she continued, she would spark a conflict her people were not prepared to forgive. The princess read the messages carefully, her hands trembling. Yet when she looked up at the faces of the humans who surrounded her, she felt her fear settle into something stronger. She could not turn back. She began speaking not only to leaders but to ordinary people, telling them that she wanted to live their way. She stood in community halls on simple platforms, even in open streets where anyone could hear. She spoke of how her people had tried to control life, how they had removed chance from their existence and how that control had left them empty. Then she spoke of humanity, their chaos, their hope, their endless ability to adapt, and how that had made them stronger than they ever realized. Her words did not fall quietly. Families nodded. Children listened with wide eyes. Elders wept as though someone had finally put their secret strength into words. For them, she was not just an alien princess. She was a mirror reflecting their own resilience back at them. Her advisors, still loyal to her people's traditions, tried to stop her. They reminded her of duty, of the throne, of the history she was bound to carry. But she looked at them with calm eyes and answered, "A crown that denies truth is no crown at all. If I must lose it, then I will lose it, but I will not lose myself." And so the council acted. One evening, as the humans gathered to hear her speak, a transmission was broadcast across the skies. Her own people declared that the princess was no longer recognized as heir. Her titles were stripped, her privileges gone. She was now a citizen without status, a daughter without a throne. The humans in the crowd gasped, some reaching out to her in sympathy, others burning with anger at the cruelty of it. The princess stood silently as the words faded. For a moment, the hall was heavy with sorrow, but then she lifted her chin, her voice clear and strong. "They may take my title," she said, "but they cannot take my choice. I am still who I am, and I choose to walk this path." The humans erupted in applause louder than ever before. It was not applause for a princess, but for a person who had stood firm. For the first time, she felt something she had never known in the halls of her palace. She felt belonging, not because of blood or law, but because of the bonds she had chosen. News of her defiance traveled faster than the council expected. Among her people, quiet debates began. Some asked why she had praised humans. Others, who had secretly doubted their own cold traditions, began to wonder if she had spoken the truth. The council silenced them where they could, but seeds had already been planted. Seeds do not listen to commands. They grow when the soil is ready. On Earth, the princess found herself walking through the streets with no guards, no banners, no titles. Yet people still greeted her with warmth. Children waved at her. Farmers offered her food. Teachers invited her to classrooms. She had lost her crown, but in losing it, she had gained something far greater. She had gained a place in the human heart. One night, standing on a hill outside the city, she looked up at the stars. The same stars that once felt cold now seemed alive, each one a promise waiting to be fulfilled. She thought of her people far away, how they lived behind walls of order, believing themselves safe, yet missing the deeper truth of what it meant to endure. She whispered softly, "One day they will understand. One day they will see what I have seen." A human friend who had come with her placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've already started it," they said. "Change takes time, but it begins with someone willing to stand alone. You've done that, and you won't be alone forever." The princess smiled faintly, her eyes still on the stars. "Then perhaps I have multiplied already," she answered. "Not in number, but in hope. Hope has grown because I carried it, and now it spreads to others. That is the human way." And in that quiet moment, she understood the full weight of her choice. She had given up a throne, but she had gained a legacy. Her people would remember her words. Humans would remember her courage. And someday, when two civilizations looked back on this time, they would not see a princess who lost everything. They would see a princess who gave everything, and in doing so changed the destiny of worlds.